The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Not the kind of rain that comes and goes. It was heavy, angry, like the sky was punishing the earth for something unsaid. Mariah sat on the wooden porch of her crooked house at the edge of Hawthorne Woods, watching the storm roll over the hills like a dark tide. Her eyes didn't blink much anymore. Her body looked tired, drained, but her mind, it was awake, always remembering. People in the town whispered about her. They called her names when they thought she couldn't hear. Witch, Heck's mother, that cursed woman, and yet no one dared go near her. Not anymore. Not after what happened to her 3 children. She hadn't always been like this. Years ago, Mariah was the heart of Hawthorne Hill, a warm woman with a voice like honey and hands that healed more than they hurt. She had 3 beautiful children: Isaac, the oldest and the strongest; Lily, the sweet one with the dimpled smile; and Jonah, the baby, who always clung to her dress like he feared the world would take him away. They were happy once, before the sickness came. It started small, like all the worst things do: a cough, a fever, then skin bruising for no reason, then bleeding, nose, mouth, eyes. It was like something was draining the life out of them from the inside. The doctors called it something rare, something Latin sounding. But Mariah didn't care what it was called. She just knew it was killing her babies. And nothing worked. No medicine, no priest, no prayer. In her desperation, she remembered something her grandmother once told her, about an old book hidden in the roots of the black oak tree behind the house. A book that was never meant to be opened. Her grandma had whispered about it during a thunderstorm, swearing it could heal or destroy. But it always asks for something in return, she had said. Mariah didn't hesitate. That night, while the children lay pale and barely breathing in their beds, she took a lantern and a spade and dug under the black oak. Her hands shook as the blade hit the wooden box buried deep. The book inside was wrapped in decaying leather, its pages stuck together with something that felt too warm to be rain. But she didn't care. She opened it. The words weren't written. They bled. As if the book itself remembered pain. It gave her instructions, in a language she shouldn't have known, but somehow understood. She followed everything. The ritual was simple but dark. The blood of a mother. The heart of a living animal. Words whispered under the red moon. She did it all. She felt the air change. She felt her skin crawl and her heartbeat slow. And in the morning, the children woke up, healthy, smiling, laughing. It was a miracle, or so she thought. But the curse didn't show itself right away. No, it was patient. It let her believe she'd won. That love had conquered death. Then the shadows came. They started with Isaac. He began talking to things that weren't there. Saying someone stood at the foot of his bed each night, whispering promises in a voice colder than snow. Then came Lily, who screamed whenever she saw her own reflection, claiming something inside the mirror was copying her wrong. Then Jonah. Poor, innocent Jonah, he just stopped talking. One day, he opened his mouth, and only silence came out. No sound, no scream, just tears and wide, broken eyes. And that's when Mariah knew. She hadn't healed them. She'd cursed them. She tried to fight it. God knows she did. She burned the book, or tried to. The flames hissed and flickered, but the damn thing wouldn't catch. She buried it again, deeper this time, poured salt in the earth, muttered every prayer she knew. But the whispers still came at night, and her children kept changing. Isaac was the first to vanish. He went into the woods one morning, claiming he heard someone calling his name. "It's grandmother," he said, though she'd been dead 15 years. Mariah tried to stop him, her hands gripping his shoulders hard enough to bruise. But his eyes were blank, empty, as if someone else had taken over. She chased after him, calling and calling, but all she found were claw marks on tree bark and a trail of dried blood leading nowhere. No body, no boy. Just silence. The townspeople had helped her search that first day, but once night fell and Isaac didn't return, they stopped trying. The pastor came to the door, offered hollow condolences, and left behind a Bible she never opened. They avoided her after that, not even looking at her when she passed by the market with her head down and Lily and Jonah clinging to her like frightened animals. And then came the second. Lily had been drawing things. Dark, twisted sketches with chalk and charcoal, figures with missing faces, children with bleeding eyes, and a tall shadow that hovered behind them all, its arms too long, its head always turned. "He watches me," she whispered to Mariah once, her voice brittle like cracked glass. "He says I'm next." Mariah burned the drawings, but the suit stayed on the walls, like the shadows didn't want to leave. One morning, Lily didn't wake up. Her mouth was open like she was still screaming, and her hands were locked around her own throat. The doctor said it was some kind of seizure, but Mariah knew better. It was punishment, payment. She held Lily's body for hours, rocking back and forth on the bedroom floor, her cries swallowed by the wind that howled through the broken window. That night, she buried her daughter behind the black oak, in the same soil that had given her the cursed book. She didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't speak. The townspeople stood far from her, whispering things they thought she couldn't hear. Witch, devil's wife, child killer. Jonah was all she had left, and he was slipping too. He hadn't spoken a single word since Lily died. He stared at corners, as if waiting for something to crawl out of them. He didn't sleep unless Mariah held him, and even then, his body shook like he was freezing from the inside out. Sometimes she caught him scratching his arms raw, whispering to himself in that strange language from the book, the one she never taught him. One night, she woke to find him standing over her, holding a kitchen knife. He wasn't trying to hurt her. No, his own wrist was bleeding. The knife was meant for himself. But he couldn't explain why. Couldn't speak at all. Just stood there, bleeding. Eyes begging her to fix something she didn't know how to fix. That's when she decided. The curse hadn't come for her children. It had come for her, and she had to end it before Jonah became another name carved into a stone. Mariah didn't sleep after that. Not even for a minute. She sat beside Jonah's bed every night, clutching an old kitchen knife in her lap. Not to protect them from something outside, but from whatever was taking root inside her son. She watched him breathe, shallow and fast, like he was always being chased in his dreams. The boy she once knew, the soft-spoken, giggling shadow always tugging at her skirt, was gone. What remained was a pale, hollow-eyed child who didn't flinch anymore. Not at thunder, not at screams. Not even when his own hand began to twitch on its own like it belonged to someone else. One morning, as the mist settled over Hawthorne Hill, Mariah made up her mind. She left Jonah sleeping and walked barefoot to the black oak, the cursed place where this nightmare had begun. The book was still there. She hadn't buried it deep enough last time, and the soil had shifted with the rain, pushing the edge of the leather, bound horror back toward the surface like something begging to be found again. She didn't even need to dig. It waited for her, smug and silent. Her hands trembled as she opened it once more. The ink still looked wet. The pages stuck together like skin on skin, warm and pulsing. She hated herself for touching it. But love made people do awful things, didn't it? That was the part no one talked about. How love could be cruel, desperate, twisted. There was one final ritual at the back. A way to end the curse, a cleansing. But it demanded a price far greater than what she had already paid. A blood sacrifice, yes, but not just any blood. The source, it read in slanted, black script. Return the gift to the sender. Seal the path. Mariah didn't understand it at first. She read it again and again until her vision blurred. And then it clicked. She was the source. It was her love, her grief, her selfishness that brought the curse upon them. She had defied nature. She had begged the universe to give her more time, more chances. And in return, it had taken her children one by one. But what if she could give herself instead? What if her death could stop it? The thought made her breath catch in her throat. She returned to the house with the book clutched tight to her chest. Jonah was awake now, sitting cross-legged on the bed, watching her, still silent, still pale. But something in his eyes had changed. Like the boy she'd lost was flickering behind them, struggling to return. Like he knew what she was about to do. That made it harder. But she couldn't hesitate. Not now. She began to prepare. She cleaned the living room with shaking hands, lit every candle she had, placed salt across the doors and windows. The ritual had to be exact. No mistakes. It demanded intent, it said. Willingness. She dressed in white. The same dress she'd worn on the day she gave birth to Jonah, all those years ago. It still smelled like lavender and sweat and fear. Jonah watched her from the hallway, not speaking, just watching, like he was already grieving. And as she sat in the center of the salt circle, the book opened in front of her, and a rusted blade in her hand, she whispered her last words to him. "I'm sorry I broke you. I only ever wanted to love you." Then she began the ritual. She carved the words into her skin. Not deep enough to die, not yet. Just enough for the curse to smell the offering. Blood pooled in her lap, soaking the white dress until it turned red. The room grew colder. Jonah screamed. It was the first sound he'd made in weeks. Jonah's scream was unlike anything Mariah had ever heard. It wasn't just a child crying out. It was pain, terror, and rage tangled into one awful sound that shook the windows and made the candles tremble. Her hands froze mid-ritual, the knife still pressed against her skin. She turned her head sharply, heart pounding, and saw him. Jonah had collapsed just outside the circle, his body convulsing violently on the wooden floor. His mouth was wide open, screaming, but his eyes. God, his eyes were jet black, no white, no iris. Just bottomless pits like open graves. The shadows had taken hold. "No," Mariah gasped, crawling toward him with bloody hands, her body aching from the ritual's drain. "No, not him. Take me." "Me!" But the boy didn't respond. From the corner of the room, the shadows began to gather. They slipped through the cracks in the walls, crept down the chimney, oozed from behind the curtains like smoke with teeth. The candles flickered violently, then died. Darkness swallowed the house whole. And in that moment, she saw it, the figure from Lily's drawings. Tall, thin, head tilted in that broken, unnatural way. Limbs that moved like they weren't made of bones at all. It stood behind Jonah, its fingers stretching toward him like they were part of the air itself. Mariah lunged. She didn't know what she was doing. There was no spell for this part. No instructions for what to do when the thing came to collect. All she had was love and madness. She screamed her son's name, wrapped her arms around his small, shaking body, and pulled him into the salt circle with her. The shadow hissed. For the first time, it looked unsure. It stopped at the edge of the salt, its formless face twitching, tilting side to side like a predator confused by its prey. Jonah had stopped screaming now. He lay limp against her chest, breathing shallow, but his eyes had returned to normal, wide, terrified, but human. Mariah looked down at the book, still open beside her, and flipped to the final page. There was a new message now, written fresh in blood she hadn't spilled yet. "You may take him from the darkness, but the darkness will not leave you." She didn't care. Mariah raised the knife high, her grip steady now. She was ready to give what the curse demanded. Her life for her son's freedom. One final act of love, even if it meant vanishing into nothing. But just as the blade began to fall, Jonah reached up. He caught her wrist. "No," he whispered. "Not you." His voice was raw, broken. But it was his. And then something changed. The air shifted. The shadow screamed, not in anger, but in pain. The circle of salt flared with light, not fire, not magic, something older, something human, love, pure, selfless, unconditional love. Jonah's small arms wrapped around Maria's waist, holding her with everything he had left. He was giving something back, not a ritual, not a sacrifice, just love returned. The curse recoiled. The shadow screamed again and began to unravel, like smoke caught in a hurricane. It flailed against the walls, scratching at the wood, trying to cling to anything, but it couldn't hold on. The house groaned. The floors shook. Then, silence. When Maria opened her eyes, the shadows were gone. The candles relit themselves, their glow warm and soft. The salt circle was broken, but they were still alive. Jonah looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "It's over, isn't it?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she knew was that he was alive. And for now, that was enough. For 2 days, the house was still, no shadows, no whispers, no signs of the dark thing that had haunted them for months. Jonah slept soundly, his body curled under blankets on the living room floor where Mariah kept him close. She hadn't moved much since the ritual. Just sat near the fireplace, watching him, afraid that if she blinked too long, he might vanish like the others. She barely ate, barely drank. Her arms were wrapped in old bedsheets, soaked with herbs to dull the sting of the ritual cuts. Every movement sent fire down her spine. But the pain was a reminder. She was still here. He was still here. But even in the peace, something gnawed at her. The house felt hollow, like the darkness had left, but not without taking something with it. The neighbors didn't come by, of course. She hadn't seen another soul since the last funeral. She doubted they even noticed she was still alive. Or maybe they just didn't care. Maybe they were too afraid of her curse, of what she had become. And honestly, she didn't blame them. Maria stared at the front door for hours, expecting something, someone, to come knocking. But nothing came. Just silence and the soft breath of her child as he finally rested without fear. On the 3rd night, things changed again. It started with the mirror. Jonah had gone to use the bathroom and came running back, face pale and eyes wide. "Mama," he whispered, clutching her hand. The mirror, it looked at me. She stood slowly, ignoring the pain, and followed him down the hallway. The bathroom was just as she left it. Dim light bulb buzzing, cracked tiles, damp floor. But when she looked at the mirror above the sink, her breath caught. Her reflection was smiling. But she wasn't. It held the same shape, the same face, but the smile was too wide, the eyes too dark. And the mouth moved even though hers didn't. Then it mouthed something she couldn't hear. But she understood it anyway. "I never leave empty-handed." Mariah slammed the mirror with her elbow, shattering the glass into 1,000 tiny fragments. Jonah screamed and grabbed her sleeve, begging her to stop. But she kept swinging until every last shard hit the ground. Breathing heavy, she leaned over the sink, her hands shaking. The curse, it wasn't over. It had changed. That's when the dreams returned. That night, she woke gasping, drenched in sweat, with blood pooling beneath her fingernails. Her sheets were torn, her arms bruised as if she'd been fighting in her sleep. Jonah stood by the bed, watching her quietly. "I heard you talking," he said. "But your mouth wasn't moving." She stared at him, too scared to ask what she'd said. The book had vanished. After the ritual, it was gone, as if it had dissolved with the last scream of the shadow. But the curse had slipped into something else now. It wasn't hunting them with monsters anymore. Now it was inside, in the mirrors, in the dreams, in the silences between heartbeats. Mariah understood what the warning meant now. You may take him from the darkness, but the darkness will not leave you. She had bargained with something ancient. She had begged it to give her children life, and when it came to collect, she fought it off with love. But love wasn't a shield. It was a trade. And while Jonah lived, something else had moved into her place. She looked down at her hands, at the thin black veins beginning to creep along her wrist. Veins that pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't quite human. And for the first time since that first ritual, Mariah began to wonder if maybe she hadn't won at all. Maybe she had just become the new vessel. The next few days blurred together. Mariah barely left the house. Her limbs grew heavier, her vision cloudier. Like something inside her was anchoring her to the floor, to the walls, to the curse. She could hear things. Soft humming in the dead of night. Strange footsteps pacing in rooms that stood empty, and sometimes, a voice that sounded eerily like Lily, calling from just behind the door she was too afraid to open. Jonah stayed close, always watching her. He didn't ask to go outside anymore, not even to play. He didn't draw or hum or pretend. He just sat near her, studying her face like he was memorizing it, like he knew what was coming before she even did. She tried to hide the veins. They were spreading, black tendrils running up her arms, across her chest, reaching for her neck. They didn't hurt exactly, not in the way knives or fire hurt. It was deeper than that, like her soul was being chewed on, piece by piece. She was becoming something else, but she wasn't gone yet. Not completely. She had one last hope, though it scared her more than death, to return to the source, the black oak, the place where she first found the book. Even without the book now, she felt it calling her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw its twisted limbs reaching toward the moon, and the sound of whispering leaves that spoke in forgotten tongues. The curse wasn't just an object or a spell. It was rooted, quite literally. It had grown out of something older than any of them. And maybe, just maybe, she could rip it out before it fully bloomed inside her. That night, she packed a satchel, herbs, salt, the broken blade from the ritual, a lighter, and a photograph, one of the last she had of Isaac, Lily, and Jonah together, smiling before the sickness took hold. She slipped it into her dress pocket like a prayer. "Stay here," she told Jonah as she knelt beside him. "Don't open the door. No matter what you hear me." He didn't speak. He just nodded, holding her wrist a little longer than he needed to. As she stepped outside, the wind met her like an old enemy, cold and wild. The path to the oak was darker than before, the trees leaning in like they wanted to watch. Every step she took was heavy, like walking through wet sand. The black veins on her arms itched, throbbed, pulsed. She ignored them. The tree appeared before her without warning. One moment, there was only darkness. The next, it was towering in front of her, twisted and ancient, its bark cracked like burnt flesh, its roots snaking out in every direction like veins in the earth. She fell to her knees. "Take it back," she whispered to the ground. "Take the curse. Take all of it. But leave him alone." The wind stilled. The forest went silent, and then the roots moved. They didn't dig or grow. They slithered. Slowly, deliberately, like fingers searching for something. They crept toward her, wrapping around her ankles, up her legs, over her arms. Her body stiffened, breath caught, and a voice echoed in her skull, not spoken, not heard, but felt. "Would you feed us again?" Mariah's lips trembled. "Only me. Just me." "You already have." The roots surged forward. They didn't pull her down. They invited her in. Her skin split where the black veins met the bark. The curse was being absorbed, drawn back into the tree. But with it, so was she. She felt herself slipping, memories draining, her children's laughter fading behind her eyes. The curse had been planted in her body, and now she was the vessel being harvested. But as her last breath rattled through her chest, she thought of Jonah, and the tree paused, the roots loosened, because something inside her refused to forget. Love again. The same force that drove the shadow back in the house was resisting even now. Deep within her, tangled with the darkness, but not drowned by it. She gripped the broken ritual blade, pressed it against the largest root, and screamed. Not this time. And for the first time, the tree bled. Black ichor oozed from the sliced root, thick and pulsing like it was alive. It sizzled as it hit the soil, smoke rising with a sharp, foul scent that stung Maria's nose. The oak let out a groan, not from wind or storm, but from deep within, like a wounded beast howling beneath the bark. The roots writhed around her, no longer welcoming. Furious now, Mariah staggered backward, the broken blade still in her grip, slick with sap that burned her skin. Her arms shook, the black veins glowing faintly now, pulsing faster. Like the curse was panicking, trying to escape her before it was too late. Too late for what? She muttered to herself through clenched teeth. You're not getting him. You're not getting anyone else. The air thickened, like the woods themselves had become flesh. Suffocating. Pressing in. The whispers returned, thousands of voices layered into one low hum that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. They spoke her name, her children's names, even her grandmother's voice came through. Soft, broken, pleading. You opened it. You fed it. You brought it back. No, she growled. You tricked me. You fed on my love, my grief. The ground cracked beneath the oak, and something began to rise. A figure. Tall, familiar, shaped like a man but wrong. Its head tilted the same way as the shadow. Its limbs cracked as it moved, like bones grinding against themselves. Its chest pulsed with a red light, as if a heart made of embers beat inside. And its face, it wore Isaac's face. Not as it had been, but twisted, lifeless. His smile was too wide, his eyes empty. Mariah fell to her knees again. Not from weakness, but from something worse, doubt. Was it really him? Could the curse have kept him? Was her boy part of this now? I'm sorry, she whispered, tears flooding her cheeks. I only wanted to save you. The figure didn't speak, but it moved closer. The bark on its body split with every step, revealing skin beneath that was pale, bruised, dying. Behind it, the oak cracked again. Another figure began to rise. Lily, then Jonah. But Mariah turned fast. No, Jonah was at home, safe. These weren't her children, they were mockeries. Echoes of what the curse had stolen. The curse was trying to manipulate her again, feeding on guilt, on sorrow. It wanted her to believe she had already lost, so she'd stop fighting. But she was done playing its game. Mariah stood tall, lifted the blade to her own chest, and held it steady. If you want me, take me. But you don't get them. Not anymore. The wind shrieked. The earth trembled. The oak cracked from the inside. Black sap burst from its trunk like blood from a vein. The mock children screamed, their voices warping into something deep and monstrous. Mariah drove the blade into her chest, not to die, but to give herself fully. To end it, to close the path. As her blood touched the soil, the ritual completed itself. One final offering, freely given, from the source. The curse had no power over willing sacrifice. That was its flaw, and so it broke. The figures turned to ash. The roots recoiled and burned. The black oak split down the center, with a deafening crack, and collapsed in on itself, vanishing into the soil like it had never existed. Mariah fell with it, her body limp, her mind drifting away from pain. In her final moment of consciousness, she heard one sound, clear and real. Jonah's voice, calling her name. The morning came slowly, as if the sun itself had hesitated before touching the town of Hawthorne Hill again. Inside the house, Jonah sat curled on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt. The fireplace had gone cold. Ash drifted in the air like snow. He hadn't moved since she left. He hadn't slept. Just stared at the door, waiting. The night had been long. At one point, the house had rattled. Every window howling with a wind that seemed to speak in broken words. The mirror in the hallway had cracked straight down the middle, and the shadows on the walls had danced like they were alive. But he had stayed still. He remembered her words. Don't open the door, no matter what you hear. And so he waited. He whispered her name to himself again and again, like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. And then, just as the sky began to bleed pale orange, the door creaked open. Jonah didn't jump. He didn't run. He just blinked. Mariah stood in the doorway, barefoot, blood on her dress, her skin pale, lips blue. But she was standing, breathing, alive. The veins were gone, so was the darkness in her eyes. He rushed into her arms, sobbing into her stomach as she collapsed to her knees, and held him close, one trembling hand tangled in his hair. "It's over," she whispered. She didn't know how she was still alive. She shouldn't have been. The blade had gone in deep, the oak had swallowed her, the curse had filled every inch of her soul, but something had let her go. Not mercy, not magic, love, real love, sacrificial, pure. She had offered herself, and the curse had nothing left to feed on, nothing to hold. It couldn't take from someone who was willing to give it all away. So it let her go. In the days that followed, Mariah didn't speak much. The neighbors who had once called her names now kept their distance for different reasons, fear wrapped in awe. Some swore they saw lightning strike the hill. Others said the black oak was never there, that the clearing behind her house had always been empty, like the land itself had buried the memory of what happened. But Mariah remembered, and she carried the scars to prove it. Jonah healed slowly. He began to speak more. He smiled again, even laughed. But the fear never fully left his eyes. Sometimes he still paused at mirrors. Sometimes he'd wake in the middle of the night and check to make sure she was still breathing. She always was. But some nights, when she looked at her reflection, she still saw flickers. Of Isaac, of Lily, of the shadow she once summoned. Sometimes the reflection didn't smile. Sometimes it looked tired, hollow, still cursed. Mariah wasn't foolish enough to believe she'd beaten it completely. Darkness doesn't just die, it waits, shifts, finds new soil. But she'd made sure it wouldn't grow here again, and as long as Jonah was safe, she would carry whatever it left behind. Because love, when it's real, is more terrifying than any curse, and far more powerful.